Hello, my name is Matylda Taszycka, and I am the curator of the show Wanda Czełkowska, Art is Not Rest at Museum Susz. My paper is entitled Self-Mythologies, Facing Wanda Czełkowska's Self-Portrait, and it's dedicated to the analysis of Czełkowska's self-portraiture. Let's look at the image carefully. If the bust representing a young woman could be confused for a simple academic subject, her bare chest and the choice of the title, autoportrait, self-portrait, seem provocative. Those who followed art history classes may recognize an Etruscan type, an oval face with geometric, simplified features, big almond-shaped eyes, incised details, pointy nose, and characteristic, enigmatic smile. Hands crossed under the chest emphasize the artist's juvenile, protruding breasts. The humor and playfulness of the work seem even more obvious in the context of a photographic portrait made at the same period, in which the artist poses next to her sculpture. There is no doubt the young woman represented here is the artist herself. In her first self-portrait in 1959, then, Wanda Czełkowska identified explicitly with one of her works. She wrote in the letter to an editor in 1963, open quote, biographical note, date of birth not given. I was born when I made the first work that I liked. That was 4 years ago, end quote. The same year, the sculpture was presented at the third Paris Biennale. Czełkowska observed with amusement how the visitors were attracted by her sculpture and tried to touch it. It seems therefore surprising that many years later, when she finally got the attention of the Polish feminist curators and art historians, the artist was wary of the gendered reinterpretation of her work. In the following years, more or less abstracted heads and busts proliferated and became Czełkowska's leitmotifs. I always had a pure mind untainted by gender. And yes, this was evident in my work, she said in an interview conducted by Ewa Opałka. One might ask, was it? Even though Czełkowska used to say her busts and heads were abstract forms rather than traditional portraits, recent research has revealed the recurrence of the photographic self-portrait in her archive, which proves to be closely related to her sculptural practice. In my paper, I would like to shed new light on Czełkowska's understanding of sculpture and gender through the previously unexplored perspective on her early interest in classical culture, revealing the challenging relationship between the artist and her craft. Rather than being insurmountable constraints, these productive contradictions turn out to be driving forces in her art. Czełkowska graduated from the Academy of Fine Arts in Krakow 5 years before producing Self-Portrait in 1954. The period of her studies coincided with the height of Stalinism in Poland, which was reflected in art by the imposition of the socialist realism. During her studies and straight after her graduation, Czełkowska produced several portraits, such as an untitled head of a woman in the socialist realist style from 1950, Studium, Portret starego mężczyzny z brodą, Study of an Old Man with Beard from 1950, Ewa Francuska, Eva, the French woman from 1951, using a model employed by the Academy, and the interpretational portrait presenting her mother, entitled Mama, Mom, from 1955, for which she received an award. Czełkowska learned her trade at the Academy in the studio of Jerzy Bandura, but arguably more influential was her time spent in Kraków libraries, especially the Czartoryski Library and the Potocki Library, studying the history of art, philosophy, and contemporary music. Her grounding in classical European culture probably comes from that period and is evident in her early works following the thaw of the Polish regime in 1956, which reveal mainly Greek, Etruscan, and Cycladic influences. This is the case of the aforementioned self-portrait, but also earlier works such as Człowiek, Man from 1956, and Studium Dziesiąte, Study 10 from 1957. The first sculpture represents a man walking who, due to his nudity, the frontal perspective, and his fixed attitude, is reminiscent of Kouros, a standing statue of a male nude youth from the archaic period of Greek art. Painted in light green, as if to imitate the oxidation of a bronze monument, this life-size plasterwork is, however, brutalized by the geometric design of its features, which give it an almost grotesque expression. This simplification continues 1 year later in the work Study 10, which continues the deconstruction of the human figure in movement by integrating the lessons of Cubist sculpture. As I stated in my earlier writings on Czełkowska, the bust and the head are also traditional subjects of Western sculpture. From this point of view, and bearing in mind that Czełkowska received very classical academic training, there is nothing surprising in the fact that bust and head recur in her work. True to her self-definition as sculptor, but never as sculptress, she subjected other media, photography, drawing, painting, to her favorite three-dimensional mode of expression. Creating a head remains the basis of classical sculpture. During the 1960s, Czełkowska produced numerous sculptures of increasingly simplified heads, distinguished by their deeply incised features, which give them the appearance sometimes of a totem, sometimes of a rock. From the end of the 1960s onwards, her heads became devoid of faces and almost abstract. In creating the 1968 head, for example, this is the work that we see in the center of the image, the artist literally exploded figuration by revealing the metallic structure inside the plaster. The surface is uneven, as if affected by erosion. The same process is used by Czełkowska in her 1972 sculpture, which is the one on the right of the image, on the right side of the image, where the head appears in its entirety but seems disfigured by deep holes. In 1973, she produced Zielona Głowa, green head, on the left side of the image, with the striking choice of a flashy color, which is the last of the series. Which of them could be considered as self-portraits? In the book published to accompany the exhibition at Muzeum Susz, Wanda Czełkowska, Artist Not Rest, I invited the American feminist art historian Abigail Solomon Godeau to reflect on the artist's photographic self-portraiture. As Solomon Godeau noted, once we start looking for them, different kinds of self-representations can be found in the artist's work. It is difficult, at first glance, to recognize in Niebieska Głowa, Blue Head of 1967 a self-portrait of the artist. But the artist herself posed with her sculpture in 2017 in front of Tadeusz Rolke's camera in a way that brings to mind her photograph with self-portrait from 1959. Let us turn to a series of black and white photographic self-portraits dating from approximately 1970. On some of them, Czełkowska poses in profile, half naked, framed at the level of the pelvis. Her head, covered with black gauze, becomes an almost dark shape, especially since the face is hidden by her forearm, which in turn reveals the sculptural dimension of her body, in particular, the geometric modeling of the ribs. In another self-portrait from the same period, Oh, here we see, so here we can see some other examples of photographic images we found in the artist studio coming from the same series. And let's go to the theme. In another self-portrait from the same period, entitled Temat, Theme, she represents herself facing the viewer, wearing a striped shirt, her head veiled in the same transparent fabric, but this time as if separated from her body, with her hands grasping her neck in an ambiguous and seemingly violent gesture. All these photographs seem to be produced at the same time in a single or several consecutive sessions. As Solomon Godot pointed out, a recognizable reference to the photograph appears in at least one of Czełkowska's lost drawings, entitled Rysunek Rzeźba, Drawing Sculpture, of which we know one reproduction. And during my research in the artist's archive, I found another drawing based on the artist's photograph, showing Czełkowska in profile. Above all, the draping of the cloth that covers the face in these photographs gives Czełkowska's head an appearance similar to the sculptures produced in the same period, which coincides with the beginning of her work on the monumental conceptual installation stool, table, presented for the first time in December 1971 at the exhibition Spotkania Krakowskie, Krakow Encounters, a cropped version of a similar photograph. So this is one of the cropped versions and the second one. So a cropped version, again, a cropped version of a similar photographic self-portrait is reproduced on the cover of the brochure of the 11th exhibition of the Second Kraków Group from 1970-1971, a brochure which contained the instruction for the table. Moreover, as Antonina Gugała noted, the cloth on Czełkowska's head recalls the gesture of covering a clay sculpture for the night, a barely veiled reference to the practice that every sculptor with academic training knows. The link between Czełkowska's photographic and sculptural practice becomes even more striking in a later series of contact prints representing a wrapped head, which is most likely Głowa Edynburska, Edinburgh head, sculpted for her exhibition in Scotland in 1972. These images precede the creation of another monumental installation, Ściana, Wall, from 1975-76, in which the same wrapped head is placed in front of the canvas as a three-dimensional sculpture, but also appears in the form of a drawing on its surface. Within this photographic series, the image that has attracted the most critical attention is Theme, which the artist decided to feature in her retrospective exhibition in Warsaw, Wanda Czełkowska Retrospekcja, in 2016. While the original print is small and has never been exhibited as an artwork, the 2016 print was enlarged, framed, and placed in proximity to the table installation. The work appears to be a kind of enigma, the solution to which would allow us to better understand Czełkowska's body of work. However, though she did not minimize its importance, the artist herself seems to have had a more detached relationship to it. Remember my self-portrait, expressly a photo in which I am suffocated with my own hands. This photo may seem deadly serious and terrifying, yet I am interested in the grotesque in this work. It amuses me, she said in her last interview. Let us proceed to a non-exhaustive list of some of the main interpretations of this work. In her essay written for the catalogue of the Warsaw exhibition, the curator of the show and Polish feminist art critic Ewa Opałka wrote, "The hands and the head belong to Wanda Czełkowska. Gender-related entanglements are quite clear here and would be hard to abandon. Furthermore, there is no denying that one of the questions provoked by Czełkowska's self-portrait is about the strangeness of the hands gripping the neck. Thick-boned, with protruding veins, man-like, the hands are very much in contrast with the breathtaking beauty of the female face. Upon a closer look, the intention is more than clear. The viewer is bound to see the artist's hands as belonging to someone else. End of quote. Salomon Godot, for her part, noticed a structural contradiction between Czełkowska's disavowal of sexual difference as a concept with political implications and an impulse, also disavowed, towards self-representation. Open quote. A theme in Czełkowska's work might be interpreted as a dialectic movement between the particularities of subjective identity, of which the assignment of gender is a fundamental element, and an aesthetic ambition to surmount or sublimate this in the material and objective substance of art, an art that positions itself outside the bonds of the social, the sexual, and the political. End of quote. For my part, as I wrote in my essay published in the same book, I believe that Czełkowska's work was formed in a tension between the materiality of her creations and their conceptual dimension. On the one hand, we have formal research and attachment to the tools and the traditional materials of sculpture, wood, plaster, metal. On the other, there is the affirmation of her work's intellectuality. Art is born of thought, said the artist, but she immediately added, you have to think and do. In my text, I placed the relationship between these two actions at the heart of Czełkowska's approach, stating that, for her, art was grey matter in both the literal and figurative sense. In the case of theme, I argued, by emphasizing head and hands in her photographic self-portrait, Czełkowska had represented herself at work, that is, performing physical and intellectual labor. Doing and thinking became, through this image, one and the same, I wrote. But there is another contradiction I didn't see at the time. Yet, this is the most classic opposition in the Western art history, the distinction art historians have always made between artist and model. In the recently published biography of the Ukrainian-born French and Israeli sculptor Hannah Orloff, the American art historian Paula Jane Birnbaum wrote about the artist's powerful portrait in her studio. Open quote. In 1924, Orloff, age 36, hired the American photojournalist Thérèse Bonnet to photograph her in her studio to promote upcoming exhibition. This photograph reveals Orloff's imposing physical presence, muscular body type, and forceful attitude. What I find most fascinating about the image is Orloff's bold pose. She sits on a pedestal, her arms folded proudly across her chest. I'm reminded of the Greek myth of Pygmalion, the sculptor who fell in love with a statue of a woman he created. Only in this case, the artist, not merely the sculptor, is a woman. She is both the maker and the object of our gaze. By sitting on the pedestal, Orloff elevates her own status as a professional sculptor, surrounded by her own creations. And in that process, she positions herself as a self-made professional woman artist who is worthy of our attention. End of quote. If many art historians agree that Czełkowska's refusal to be considered as a woman artist is grounded in the masculinist paradigm of modern art and reflects the power relations at play in her time, it is possible that her convictions are grounded in an even more ingrained idea she had of her craft, and the traditional division of roles in an artist's studio between the sculptor, usually a man, and his model, usually a woman. In Paula Birnbaum's words, Czełkowska's photographic images invite us to question the classical distinction between the maker and the object of our gaze, of which the myth of Pygmalion and Galatea may be considered as the founding narrative. In Czełkowska's case, as shown above, the model is often the artist herself, with her overt sexuality. And yet, when it comes to her gender as a sculptor, her femininity makes way for a supposed neutrality, which is in fact a form of recognition of the dominant masculinity. It seems, however, that Czełkowska realized this internal contradiction in her work quite early in her career. In 1961, she was awarded the first place in a competition for a medal to mark the 50th anniversary of the ZPAP, Związek Polskich Artystów Plastyków, Association of Polish Artists. She produced the medal representing the myth of Pygmalion and Galatea, which remains one of the few commissions the artist successfully completed during her lifetime. Czełkowska imagined a classical composition with two figures facing each other, the sculptor on the left and the bust of Galatea on the right, which brings to mind Czełkowska's self-portrait from the 1959. However, quite surprisingly in such an early work, the gender of two figures seems blurred. Pygmalion appears androgynous, while Galatea has neither particularly feminine nor masculine features, and could be therefore considered as one of the first heads Czełkowska will later qualify as of a third gender. In this context, it is interesting to look back to the artist's photographs, in which she posed next to her sculpted self-portraits. In both cases, the maker and the object of our gaze are reunited in the same image. Both sculptures are situated on pedestals, which elevate them to the level of a standing person, but also confirm their status as works of art. In the second image, the elderly artist seems to be grasping a sculpture from her youth, as if she were holding an old friend. Moreover, as Émilie Bouvard has pointed out, the artist presented herself in front of her installation wall, thereby replacing the sculpture of wrapped head by her own body. If the staging here seems simpler than in Hannah Orloff's portrait, the visual pan becomes more complex when we look once again at Theme from 1970. So, what do we see exactly? There is the head and the face, those of Czełkowska, who represents herself as a young and lovely woman. And there are also hands grasping the neck of the model. These hands seemed masculine to Ewa Opałka. But are they really? I rather have a feeling I am looking at the powerful, muscular hands, not of a man, but of a sculptor, used to working with matter. The gesture is like the addition of a pedestal, in that it stresses the sculptural dimension of the head. To use Paula Birnbaum's words, the image reveals Czełkowska's physical presence, muscular body type, and forceful attitude, which are the features of a person who chose sculpture as her craft and wishes to affirm it. In the classical pattern, the sculptor immobilizes and reifies his model. He inflicts symbolic death on them as a subject, at the same time iconizing them and transforming them into an object to be gazed at, and, as the story of Pygmalion shows, to be desired. However, in Czełkowska's case, the old Greek myth is transformed into a grotesque fable. The spectator no longer knows whether it is the sculptor who reifies the model or the model who became alive and takes hold of the sculpture. It doesn't matter in the end, as Czełkowska plays both characters to go beyond traditional binary divisions. Thank you.